Hey, welcome to this extended panel for the Georgia vote. If you caught us this week, we're talking all things sine die under the Gold Dome, as well as the upcoming runoff race for District 14, Marjorie Taylor Greene's old district. We have Zach Merchant here with me, Fred Hicks, Democratic strategist, as well as Republican strategist Joshua Edmonds, and Greg Bluestein. You know him from the AJC. Gentlemen, we spoke a lot about sine die. We spoke a lot about District 14. I want to talk about the May 19th primaries coming up, specifically this governor's race, an open seat on each side. Greg, what are you looking at right now?
Well, on the Republican side, look, it is a all-out slugfest between Rick Jackson and Burt Jones. You've seen it get really nasty, really fast. Experts who have been around a lot longer than any of us have said this is one of the nastiest races they've ever seen, internal races they've ever seen in Georgia politics. This just gives you a glimpse of what to expect, especially if this ends up in a runoff. The Democratic side, it is a race for second place because everyone kind of concedes that Keisha Lance Bottoms has one of the spots in the runoff. Who knows what could happen? But there is an all-out brawl for that number 2 spot.
Let's talk about the tone and the tenor of this Republican bruising is one adjective to describe it. It's become quite a battle here. You said some old Georgia politics hands have described it as one of the nastiest intra-party fights they've ever seen. Those comments are coming still 7-8 weeks out from the primary, so that heat just keeps getting turned up and up and up and up.
And now that session's over, he can campaign more.
It's game on completely. Yeah. Joshua, you're a Republican. What's going on in this governor's battle, and does it hurt or help the party looking ahead to November?
You know, I think Greg must be loving this. Is the next book, right? Is just this, as Jim Ross and WWF back in the day called a slobber knocker, and this, gubernatorial race. I've never seen anything like this. I think that at the end of the day, when you get down to generic ballot, R versus D, who is at the top of the ticket in the governor's race is going to be of ultimate consequence, and who pulls that Kemp coalition Republican crowd across to the right side of the ballot with them. And what these two candidates at the forefront of this fight are trying to do is not only establish that they're the most conservative candidate to earn the nomination, but build a foundation that they can build on come November to be the guy that is going to carry the ticket across the finish line. And I think the longer the bloody noses go on, the harder it probably gets for some.
I'm really interested in the primaries to see what the voters say too, because I mean, obviously you have these two at the top, but you still have Chris Carr and Raffensperger. And then let's switch gears over to the Democrats, because Keisha Lance Bottoms, the former mayor, the polling has her up. Some polls had her slightly down. Of course, her opponents kind of jumped on that. But Fred, realistically, going in, who gets into this runoff?
Well, I want to say one thing about the Republican side that's really curious to me. Neither Rick Jackson or Burt Jones are campaigning as if they're going to be Brian Kemp 2.0, and he's the most popular elected official in Georgia. They're going for one of the least popular elected officials or representatives in Donald Trump, and that's just weird to me. And I think to segue to us, to Democrats, I think this is a really good thing for us. And so Donald Trump is at the center of both campaigns, right? So Keisha Lance Bottoms is saying he doesn't like me. Jason Estevez and others are saying we're going to fight against Donald Trump. And so I think that when you look at the latest polling, right, that has Keisha Lance Bottoms at about 32% and a three-way cluster for second, it's going to come down to strategy right now and really, really understanding the messaging and how they're going to deploy their assets. When everyone is basically in a tie for second and they have roughly the same amount of money, it comes down to how you execute and where you put your time, effort, and money.
When do the gloves really come off in the Democratic primary?
Oh, I think the end of session was the start of everything, right? It was like the firing of the gun. And so I think that, and this one, and what's interesting is the three people clustered for second are going to be firing at each other, allowing.
And you're talking about the three you say clustered around second:
yes,
Jason Estevez, Jeff Duncan, and Mike Thurmond.
Right. And so they're so busy trying to get into that second place that it allows Mayor Bottoms to just continue to glide and coast.
And you have not heard, unlike the Republican side, you have not seen much of that on the Democrat side where people are putting attacks towards the former mayor. Why is that?
Well, I think there are two things, right? And we can never overlook the dynamics of race and gender, right? Especially in Democratic politics, and her being the only woman in the race and her being African American, that puts someone like Jeff Duncan at a real kind of disadvantage in wanting to attack her, or even a Jason Estevez. And we just haven't seen or heard much from CEO Michael Thurman in one way or another. And he's the one candidate who's African American from Metro who might be able to draw a contrast in leadership styles and looking at what he accomplished in DeKalb versus what happened in her one term, or how people feel about her one term as mayor. But he hasn't done that. So it's going to be really interesting. And it's also problematic, I think, for the big three outside of her, because there's still a 20-point gap. And how do you close that in what is, in essence, 25 days of actual campaigning in a runoff?
And still a lot of undecided voters, Greg.
Yeah, I'll give you one stat. More than $80 million has now been spent on the TV ad wars over this gubernatorial campaign. Only about $1 million has been spent on the Democratic side. That just gives you a glimpse of all the attention, the overwhelming attention going towards the Republican side, good and bad.
And overwhelming money, because they got money. On the Democrat side right now is not, I mean, the pockets will be filled after the primary, but right now, I mean, the Republicans have a lot of money right now.
And true enough, the spending is going to ratchet up. Whoever the nominees are for both parties, they're going to get lots of national money pouring in. Joshua, I want to circle back to something Fred said earlier about this battle we're seeing between Rick Jackson and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Fred made the point that, in his view, both of them seem to be doing all they can to style themselves after President Donald Trump, and not so much drawing close associations with Governor Brian Kemp, who is a popular two-term incumbent here in Georgia, of course. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, what's the strategy behind that? Why do these two, it appears, Republican frontrunners, why are they going in the Trump route and not the Kemp route?
You know, I actually disagree with the assessment. If you look at the messaging and the identity that Rick Jackson is presenting, he's talking about leaning in and providing leadership during the pandemic. He's talking about his background as a foster child who aged out, who built himself from nothing. He's talking about going in and protecting kids in schools from these policies that the woke left is infecting our classrooms with. The messaging sounds like Trump. The picture looks like Kemp. And I think that Rick Jackson's doing more to position himself in a way where he is the everyman. He is someone who has run a business. He knows how to make a payroll. He's someone who's built sort of the Georgia version of the American dream, whereas Burt Jones is the silver spoon candidate in the race. Rick is presenting himself that way, and I think that caters much more to the Kemp coalition than it does to folks who...
Fred, a quick word to you, and then Greg, I want to bring you in on this too before we run out of time.
Rick Jackson spent more time in Mar-a-Lago than he has in Athens, right? And then that's a problem. And number two, he just made a whole big deal about, in his disclosure report, that, I'm actually worth $3.9 billion. He just doesn't allow me to say that. That's not very, Brian Kempy, where he's folksy and in the pickup truck. So
we'll see. And we'll see whose strategy ends up carrying the day, or it could be the other two major candidates in this Republican primary. Of course, Chris Carr, the Attorney General, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. We're short on time. Greg, last word to you. Rub the crystal ball. Who gets into these runoff races if you're comfortable making a guess?
Yeah,
here?
it's hard to ignore the polls that show the two co-frontrunners really right now, Rick Jackson, Burt Jones. Carr and Raffensperger still feel like they have some sort of lane. Running is the more mainstream Republican, the Kemp type ideal. But look, you can't ignore the fact that Rick Jackson is also running to be what he calls Trump's favorite governor. So he's running a very Trumpian campaign.
And still a lot of road to go. I mean, a lot can change in just a couple of weeks, as we all have seen in Georgia politics. We are out of time. As always, so much to talk about in Georgia politics. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to our panel, as always. We'll see you next time.